Yeah. Okay, thank you, Anne. This presentation is a sort of introduction to this seminar. So the seminar about network TV. So why this seminar? I must say that network TV series have accompanied me my whole life. I am a TV series addict since the beginning of the 90s. And most of the series that have had an impact on my life were broadcasted on networks. I'm talking about Quantum Leap, The X-Files, ER, Buffy, Angel, Lost, Supernatural, etc. They overwhelmed me, they made me dream, they made me think, they helped me becoming the person I am today, and they probably are one of the reasons why I am in academia today. But this type of series is largely underestimated, except for very few examples, and at least in France, they are less studied, especially in an aesthetical point of view. However, I think this work is essential. First, network TV series are a large part of the industry and generally gather the highest numbers of audience members. It is true that a show like The Walking Dead is now in this group of TV series, but generally and historically, it was and still is, for the most part, network TV series. So you cannot act as if they did not exist. You have to study them to understand what is a TV series today. Second point, cable TV is a recent thing. So network TV represents decades of programs, and it is essential to go back to the 50s, to the 60s, etc., to understand the evolutions of formats of narration. Too often, only very recent shows are studied, as if television seriality had been invented yesterday. But for example, so many 80s shows have built modern television, and I think it is the case with Beauty and the Beast. That is why I chose this example. So you have to go back in history in order not to think that something is new when in fact it is not new at all, or simply to understand the real changes. And last point, and my main reason, TV series from the networks are often despised because they are considered commercial television. Yes, money and advertisement are involved, but those constraints do not prevent some of these works to be works of art and to have an incredible depth on an amazing experimental approach to fiction or to narration. And the innovations you see today are largely the result of groundbreaking older TV series that in the time managed to impose new ideas and new forms within the constraints of the system. I think that is absolutely the case with the show that I'd like to talk about today, which is a complete freak in the television landscape. And I use this term voluntarily because the question of freaks are at the core of this show. The idea of the series being there are no freaks here. Beauty and the Beast was broadcasted from 1987 to 1990 on CBS and created by Ron Coslow. The main characters were played by Linda Hamilton and Rose Perlman. It recreates the Beauty and the Beast story in the New York from the 80s. Catherine is an assistant district attorney and falls in love with Vincent, who is half man, half lion, and lives underground in a kind of utopian community led by his adopted father. First, this is a groundbreaking show which, at the end of the 80s, led to new possibilities for television seriality. And I think it's important to understand the links between nowadays television and these kind of shows. For example, one of the screenwriters of the show was none other than George Martin, the author of Game of Thrones. And you can also find in the team Howard Gordon and Alex Gansa, and they worked later on The X-Files, Buffy, Angel, 24, and created Homeland in 2011. So you can draw the story of contemporary American television here. Recent shows are not coming from nowhere. They have to be thought in a context. And it is obvious that Beauty and the Beast has been influential for many people. For example, there is a very clear affiliation with Buffy, with this idea of two worlds, the realistic one and the fantastic being a way to discuss the real one, the very strong and complex female characters, the tragic love story between a human and a non-human, etc. And one scene in Buffy is an exact adaptation of a scene from Beauty and the Beast. Catherine is in Los Angeles, and thinks about Vincent, who is far away, and she imagines the possibility of having a walk with him on the beach in the sunlight. And in the third season of Buffy is also in Los Angeles after having killed Angel, and she dreams about it. And I just wanted to show you a short excerpt from Beauty and the Beast, and you will recognize the scene from Buffy. It's here. Okay, so this is exactly the same thing. She's dreaming because he's not here, really. Okay, so it was just a short illustration. So here you have two dreams and a dialogue between distance and proximity, and two couples that cannot exist in the sunlight and are compelled to leave their love hidden. In both cases, the fantastic world is the world where emotions are stronger, where everything is important. The only difference is that in Beauty and the Beast, the underground world is not the hellmouth, but a utopia. But in both cases, the fiction itself is a utopian place where you can think our own world and maybe emancipate from its rules and oppression. The structure of Beauty and the Beast is very interesting in terms of genres, narration and format. To sum up, it is a form that I called semi-serialized formula show. It's a translation from my words in French. Even if the structure of the show is not stable, it tries some elements that are going to become classical structures in the 90s. You have most of the time a close story in every episode, generally about an outcast or someone who has suffered some violence from society. And the two heroes are going to try to help this person, whether it is with the means of the upper world or by those of the world below. So the formula of the show relies on an hybridization of two genres, the procedural with Catherine stories and the fantastic. To this first structure, you have to add the serialized story, which is the evolution of Catherine and Vincent's couple and the life in the community of the tunnels below the city. So the structure of the show is an image of its concept, which is a very harsh critic of the American society at the end of the 80s, where a lot of people are marginalized because of a very violent and unequal system. The formulaic aspects of the show underlines these problems, and the serialized aspect offers a counter-image, an alternate way. The series is quite amazing because of its political content. The tunnels are a society with no money, where everything belongs to everyone, and you have to remember that we were during Reagan's decade. So basically, the tunnel's inhabitants are communists, or at least they could be seen as communists. And this society is presented as the good guys. Against who? Generally the finance, the powerful that reign over the city without pity and crush the poor. And moreover, it is a society where everyone is accepted as he or she is, whatever their differences. And of course, Vincent himself is a perfect image of that. He could not be accepted in the upper world, but underground, they see him for what he is, which is a human being. And even Catherine and Vincent are very unusual, beautiful couple. So it's a strong message against conservative view of the world. And we are on CBS in 1987 and not on HBO in 2017. And I think that this show was, in a way, more daring and more politically interesting than a lot of television that call themselves progressive, and you can see today. It's a show fundamentally against norms. I was quoting this sentence from the show, there are no freaks here. It's against unequal systems, it's against hierarchy, not only politically in terms of discrimination against minorities, for example, but it also denounces the profoundly destructive aspect of the economical, capitalistic, and neoliberal system. At the end of season 1, Catherine has doubts. She worries about the sacrifices that her relationship with Vincent seems to imply, and she talks about it with her friend, who is a typical WASP in a big house with a husband and children, traditional family. And then the friend says, basically, my way is not the way. Don't worry about what people say and about what you should do or not do, just follow your heart. So this is the kind of statement you can find in the series, and that could be applied to a lot of political contexts. The whole show is always pushing the limits of this view of the world. Sometimes even the people below can be afraid of some form of authority or some form of new ideas, and this is always the voice that reminds them that they have to love, and especially not to fear. The only problem maybe is that the show builds a world apart from society. It is not the story of revolution against what the characters criticize. But fundamentally, the love story builds the message of the show. Love is a point of view in Beauty and the Beast. I'm not saying that the show is perfect politically in terms of representation, but there are very interesting aspects, especially the two main female characters, Catherine and Diana, who are very independent and complex characters. And also the representation of the male characters are very unusual, and it's not the typical masculinity of the 80s at all. It's a very complex and subtle one. We have to add to all these aspects another very interesting one, which is a very unusual valorization of culture, of music, of poetry in this show. I hear a lot about the fact that network television is determined by advertisement and commercial aims. Well, here you have a TV show where characters, during entire scenes, are reading poetry aloud, like Wordsworth, Blake, Shakespeare. And I'm going to show you just one example, but there are many in the series. It's very long scenes. Oh, it's not this one. Okay. Yeah. To this one? Oh, okay. You can go. It's okay. It's okay. Having been must ever be the sending of thoughts, bring out of human suffering. In the faith that looks through death, in years that bring the endless life of mine. I give something like that. Okay, and the interesting idea here, I think, is a place in between. I'm going to talk about that later. So, you know, it's really, this aspect is really surprising in this kind of show. Maybe I'm mistaken, but I don't think you hear a lot of executives saying things like, listen, guys, we have to gather more viewers, so less action, more poetry. You know, I mean, Beauty and the Beast is very unique, and I really have no idea how they were able to keep a show like that for 3 years. But the thing is that they did. And literature and music here are not just ornamental. They are at the core of the ideas of the show, because they represent a way to say and think the world differently, to seek for beauty, humanity, love, and not for money and power, for example. Literature in the series represents emotions and also knowledge, what is the most human in us. So Catherine and Vincent's love is nourished and represented by books. Books are a space in between, like the tunnels or Catherine's balcony. It's a protected place, a space where something else is possible. It's another world, and maybe a better world. The idea of the show, I think, is to re-enchant the world. And by what? By absolute love. It's not that the series is not violent or very dark and tragic, because it really is. But even if the characters are facing all this suffering, they never give up and they never lose their deep love for others. So the TV series plays for us the same role as the other works of art play for the characters in the show. The series was really influential and had a very dedicated audience. Jenkins talks about it in Textual Cultures, published at the beginning of the 90s, as an example of dedicated fandom. Fans of the show are going to produce a lot of fan art, fan fictions. And it's not surprising, because this is a show that, because of its format and the way it plays with genres, creates a world where a lot of stories can be told. And it always put together a mythical aspect and a modern and a political one. Catherine and Vincent are a legendary couple. There is a mise en abîme of that in the show itself, when a young character who plays role-playing games with his friends is going to incorporate Catherine and Vincent's characters in his game. This is an extract from an episode called Labyrinth. Yeah. And yeah, this one, okay. Okay, and this one, yeah, and this one is to the end of the episode.
Vincent, the protector, regularly Catherine and keeps her safe from harm. Vincent? Who's Vincent? Is he the protector? No, he's been there the whole time. I guess I just forgot to tell you guys. Well, this game's over. I'm kind of tired of it. Here it is. Tell us what happened. Huh? You know, I mean, tell me. What was that? Just breaks, stones. Nothing much. That is great idea. We built this multi-level thing. It all takes place in these skyscrapers. Skyscrapers. Yeah, basically.
Okay, so I like this transition very much, because the characters, it's interesting. So Catherine and Vincent are real, but at the same time they are an image, an ideal that we can remember and think about as if it had always existed. The young man says, he's been there the whole time, I just forgot to tell you guys. So it's the characteristics of mythic character. It has always been there. So the show is also talking about the role, I think, of fiction and of fantasy. It's a very reflexive show, which is one of the great characteristics of contemporary series. There are already a lot of experimentations in the show, especially with dream sequences. And Sarah Atruel has shown how much dream sequences are a crucial point in contemporary television. In Beauty and the Beast, there is a sense of urgency in dream and in fiction. We have to understand the world, and to do that, we have to dream it first. The show relies constantly on this importance of fantasy. Fantasy in the series is not unreal. It only displays codes and rules and builds another structure that can reveal what is the world we live in. It's a counterpoint. Also because through the fantasy world, we can see real persons that are excluded from the supposedly true world. And I think that is what Beauty and the Beast brings us. Even if we are not an American viewer from the 80s, I really think that we need to understand that maybe we live in a fantasy world that benefits only a few people, and that we have to build another fantasy, but a one where we can all live in. Thank you.